In October of 1974, some nasty surprises started washing up in London along the banks of the River Thames. On October 5th, the upper part of a man's torso was discovered in the river near the East London suburb of Rainham. The very next day, the lower part of the same torso would be found 15 miles west near the Woolwich Ferry. Police initially thought that some poor guy had been sliced and diced by a ship's propeller. But over the next week and a half, 3 more body parts would be discovered at various points along the Thames, and it became clear to the police that this was no accident. An investigation was launched, but both the head and the hands of this victim were conspicuously absent from the body parts that had washed up on the riverbanks. Somebody had gone to a lot of trouble to conceal this dead man's identity. My name is Michael, and this is the story of what London newspapers came to call the torso murder, or in some cases, the jigsaw murder. And both of these names could very easily be confused with other cases that also involve a dismembered victim. This case is a little bit less well known in true crime circles, but believe me, it has plenty of twists and turns. It's a doozy, and it even comes with a surprise ending. Also, please be warned that there will be some fairly graphic descriptions of violence. The full newspaper article from this story's thumbnail is available at grimsilence.com, and if you're interested in true crime that's a bit older and more obscure, please be sure to like and subscribe. 36-year-old William Moseley, more commonly known to his associates as Billy Moseley, was a father of 3 and a small-time criminal who lived in the Finchley district of North London. Little is known about his childhood except that crime was a way of life for Moseley from an early age. It is said that Moseley and his longtime friend, 37-year-old Mickey Cornwall, shared a childhood of crimes together that grew into an adult friendship of much bigger crimes. In September of 1974, Moseley had just been released from a short stay in prison for an unnamed infraction that the newspapers didn't report on. Roughly 2 weeks later, Moseley disappeared and was not seen again, until October, that is, when parts of his body washed up on the shores of the Thames. With no head to identify the dismembered body and no hands to provide fingerprints, police had no idea who this victim was. But they suspected that this person had been shot in the head or beaten to death, and they assumed that the head would never be located. This was the first of many assumptions that the police would be dead wrong about. And close examination of the various body parts that had surfaced led investigators to some very disturbing findings. They determined that this person's toenails had been torn out while the victim was still alive, and that the feet had been burned in some way, possibly with cigarettes or matches. The left leg had been crushed in a vise. A multitude of lacerations indicated that the body had either been whipped or tied up. There were slash marks across the chest, and this man had probably been starved for 3 days before his life was finally ended. Authorities concluded that whoever this person was, he had been held captive, violently tortured, and died a horrible death before he was sawn into pieces with a hacksaw. To identify the body, the police turned to Professor James Cameron. This James Cameron was a forensic pathologist, not a Hollywood director, and working on a police hunch that the body parts might belong to Moseley, who was known to be missing, Cameron went to work. X-rays of the torso were compared to X-rays of Moseley from when he was in prison, and they matched up. Cameron also saw similarities in the curvature of the spine, and he noted that the torso had gallstones, which Moseley suffered from as well. Based on this evidence, Cameron was certain that the dismembered body he had examined was Billy Moseley's. The police did some digging and learned a few things about Moseley's personal life before he was murdered. There was an unconfirmed rumor that Moseley had ties to a pair of men who had assaulted and robbed a diamond dealer in 1973. The 2 thieves got away with a small fortune in jewels and were said to have entrusted them to Moseley for safekeeping. Police also learned that Moseley, prior to his recent prison sentence, had been carrying on an affair with a woman who was married to a man named Ronald Fright. Fright, who lived in the North London district of Islington, was a 39-year-old burner, the meaning of which is unclear, but it could mean that his job was similar to welding. Regardless, Fright had criminal ties, and he did eventually find out about his wife running around with Moseley. And it was discovered that back in 1968, Billy Moseley had been in a bar brawl with a Mr. Reginald Dudley, a man who had been twice imprisoned on charges of assault and theft. The fight ended with Moseley coming out on top. After this defeat, Reginald Dudley would emerge in the ensuing years as an important figure in the London crime scene, and incidentally, Dudley was also an associate of Fright, the man whose wife Moseley was involved with. And then there was the allegation that Moseley had committed what amounted to a cardinal sin in Gangland. He had accused two fellow criminals of being grassers. A grasser is an informant, someone who talks to the police and therefore has no honor and deserves no respect and no standing in the underworld of thieves and hooligans. To accuse one of being a grasser, and to make this accusation publicly, no less, was a gravely serious matter, and Moseley had allegedly done exactly this, and the people he accused were two jewelers whose work was at the illegal end of the jewelry business, as one Guardian writer put it. One of these jewelers, alleged by Moseley to be a grasser, was 46-year-old Robert Maynard, who lived in the London borough of Camden. The other illicit jeweler and alleged grasser was 51-year-old Reginald Dudley of Haringey, London, the associate of Ronald Fright and the man Moseley had beaten up in 1968. While police were trying to get to the bottom of who had cut Billy Moseley's body into pieces, Mickey Cornwall was quietly trying to do the same thing. Cornwall, a bank robber who had also been released from prison not long after Moseley, was extremely upset over what had become of his childhood friend. Cornwall is said to have vowed to find out who was responsible for murdering Billy Moseley and chopping him into pieces. With his criminal ties to the London underworld, Cornwall reportedly inched closer and closer to the truth, ultimately getting too close. In September of 1975, 11 months after Billy Moseley had washed up on the riverbanks one piece at a time, a father and son were on a light-hearted treasure hunt in the woods of Hertfordshire, north of London. The little boy pretended to be digging up a treasure, but what he actually dug up was Mickey Cornwall's dead body in a shallow grave. Cornwall had been shot through the temple at close range, indicating that this was indeed an execution. There was also evidence that Cornwall had been tortured as well. Police initially believed that Cornwall had been murdered for informing on other criminals to authorities, because apparently he actually was squealing, and that was how the newspapers reported it. But after learning of his close friendship with Moseley, the investigation into Cornwall's murder took a sharp turn. The police investigation, led by Commander Bert Wickstead of the London Police, zeroed in on Reginald Dudley, Robert Maynard, Ronald Fright, and several others in what they painted as a gangland revenge plot that targeted both Billy Moseley and Mickey Cornwall. Wickstead believed that Dudley was the leader of a ruthless crime gang ominously called Legal and General, also the name of a British life insurance company, with the implication being that if you cross this gang, you'd better have life insurance. Police already knew that Moseley had been sleeping with Ronald Fright's wife, therefore giving Fright a reason to want to kill Moseley. Dudley and Maynard, allegedly having been called out as grassers who squealed to the police, had a motive to kill Moseley as well. And of course, Reginald Dudley's ego may never have recovered from the beating Moseley had given him in that bar fight years earlier, adding yet another reason for Dudley to want to mercilessly torture Moseley and then dump pieces of his corpse in the River Thames. Authorities also believed they had proof that Dudley and Maynard knew about Moseley's death before any parts of his body had surfaced in the river. 35-year-old George Thomas Spencer, a scrap dealer from Bethnal Green in East London, had accompanied Dudley and Maynard as they went to see Robert Maynard's younger brother, 39-year-old Ernest Maynard, a driver who lived in Finsbury Park. This visit, which took place on October 3rd, was 2 days before any of Moseley's body parts had been discovered, and according to police, the purpose of this visit was to inform Ernest Maynard that Moseley was dead. And on top of all of these reasons for wanting to torture and kill Billy Moseley, police also theorized that Moseley had something valuable hidden in a safe deposit box, and Dudley and his gang wanted it. Perhaps it was those diamonds that were stolen from the diamond dealer in 1973, which police suspected Dudley of planning. Reginald Dudley's 26-year-old daughter, Kathleen, a counter clerk at a betting parlor, was also ensnared in this police investigation. Kathleen was involved with a man named Ray Barron who, unsurprisingly in this cast of characters, had somehow landed himself behind bars. And then Kathleen met Mickey Cornwall. Remember, Cornwall was said to have been on a mission to find Moseley's killer, and police theorized that Cornwall's search had led him to Reginald Dudley. So Cornwall, in a clever ploy to get close to Dudley, turned on the charm and romanced Dudley's daughter. Kathleen's father, the apparent kingpin of this legal and general crime syndicate, was enraged. Reginald Dudley saw Cornwall as a loser who had no business sleeping with his daughter. Police believed that Dudley had coerced his daughter into participating in a plot to entrap Cornwall so that the gang could deliver his punishment. And according to police, Ernest Maynard, Robert Maynard's younger brother, was asked what should happen to a man who takes a girl away from a guy while he's in prison, clearly referring to Cornwall's dalliance with Kathleen Dudley. Ernest Maynard allegedly answered this question by simply saying, "a striping," as he dragged a finger across his throat in a threatening way. With all of the puzzle pieces in place, Bert Wickstead ordered his officers to saddle up for a big operation. Early in the morning of January 22, 1976, 4 months after Mickey Cornwall's body had been discovered with a gunshot wound to his head, officers from both London and Hertfordshire made their move. They raided multiple locations simultaneously, taking Reginald Dudley, his daughter, and his entire crew into custody. Reginald Dudley, Robert Maynard, George Thomas Spencer, and Ronald Fright were all charged with murder. Kathleen Dudley, Ernest Maynard, and Charlie Clark, a 52-year-old greengrocer from Upper Holloway, were all slapped with the lesser charge of conspiracy to cause grievous harm. This turned out to be the longest murder trial in England's history at the time. Longer trials have since taken place, but the murder trial of the alleged legal and general gang took 135 days, or about 4.5 months. And during these 4.5 months, the headlines came fast and furious. Newspapers framed the murders of Moseley and Cornwall as a gangland torture plot, while the courtroom drama unfolded at the Old Bailey, which is the local nickname for the Central Criminal Court of England and Wales, so named for the street on which the court is located. There were a number of dramatic moments in court. In one instance, Robert Maynard cried on the stand as he explained that Billy Moseley was a close friend, the best man at his wedding, and that they each had a child named for the other. And he wasn't putting on an act. The two were indeed close, and this has been confirmed. Apart from that, there was testimony from 2 prisoners who had met the defendants while in jail awaiting trial. One of them was a man named Frank Robert Reed, who was in jail for possessing a sawed-off shotgun with intent to use it on someone. According to Reed, he spoke with Ronald Fright in the bathroom at Pentonville Jail, where the 2 men talked about what they had done to end up there. Reed claimed that Fright explained his crime by saying, "We sawed one up. We threw it in the Thames." This caused Ronald Fright to have a little outburst in the courtroom, crying, "This is a bloody fit-up. He is trying to get his own case thrown out." Of course, fit-up is the British term for what Americans would call a setup, and Fright was clearly accusing Reed of lying in order to get off the hook for his own crimes. When asked why he would share this information with the court, Reed replied that he had seen a lot of violence in his life, and he felt that he needed to do something to make the violence stop. A similar and much more consequential witness came forward, one Tony Wilde, who had been jailed along with Reginald Dudley at Brixton Prison. Wilde described Dudley and Maynard as, quote, animals who laughed at the killing of a man. Also, F-bomb alert, as I'm going to read a direct quote here, where Wilde also testified that Dudley mimed the act of shooting a gun and said of Cornwall, "He went up in the f***ing air, didn't he, boys?" According to Wilde, Dudley went on to say that he had taken a severed head to a pub in Brighton, where the pub owner nearly died of shock. Wilde told the court that Dudley said that he had killed Moseley, and then came the cherry on top of Wilde's testimony, that Dudley said he was out to get Wickstead, the London police commander who was in charge of the investigation into Dudley and his gang, and that Dudley's courtroom defense would be focused on attacking the man who had put him in jail. The severed head story made headlines, and Wilde's testimony became one of two major pieces of evidence in this trial, neither of which involved any forensics. In fact, the prosecution would present zero forensic evidence at all. The other major piece of evidence was alleged confessions and incriminating statements made by Dudley and Maynard. According to police, Dudley had some choice words to say about Moseley while being transported in a police car. Also, I am about to say several naughty words, which of course I'll bleep. What Dudley allegedly told police about Moseley was this: the cunt, Moseley being the cunt, had it coming. He tried to f*** me, so I f***ed him good and proper. And on the murder of Mickey Cornwall, quote, "You can take it from me, it is not on my conscience. He deserved what he got, and that's it." Police say Maynard told them, quote, "It's about time you came for me." Dudley and Maynard deny having ever said these things. The police also submitted a written account of a confession, probably by Dudley since he seemed to be the main target in this case. The confession was spoken but written down by a police officer, and the legitimacy of this confession would later be questioned because it was so long that it could not possibly have been written down in the 51 minutes that police say it took. This trial would end with Kathleen Dudley receiving a suspended 2-year sentence, meaning that she was convicted but essentially on probation. Ronald Fright was acquitted, despite the testimony from the inmate who claimed to have heard him confess to murder. Ernest Maynard and George Spencer were cleared of all charges. Charlie Clark, who supposedly had some role in the murders, but I have no idea what, was convicted on the conspiracy charge. As for Reginald Dudley and Robert Maynard, they were both convicted, at which point Dudley shouted at Wickstead, "Are you happy? You have fitted us all up, but don't worry, you'll be fitted up in the end by your own kind." But that is definitely not where this story ends. This trial ended in the middle of June 1977, 6 weeks after Dudley and Maynard were convicted of murder, and mind you, while they were in prison serving their time, a road sweeper by the name of Harry Bromley was just going about his day, working in the North London district of Islington, when he found a severed head in a public restroom. The head was wrapped in a newspaper dated June 16th, which was the day that Ronald Fright was acquitted of murder charges. The head had been severely beaten, and it was damp, as if it had been thawing out after being frozen for some time. Now, one would think that this would call into question the convictions of Dudley and Maynard. After all, they were in prison when this head magically appeared out of nowhere, and by the way, it was confirmed to belong to Billy Moseley. Wickstead, the man Dudley was supposedly out to get, had this to say: "2 men were convicted by 12 men good and true. I have not seen or heard anything yet to make me change my mind." Yes, even this extremely shocking new development could not change Wickstead's mind. He had wanted to lock up Dudley and Maynard, and he succeeded, so to him it was case closed, and the Home Office, the British government agency that could have done something, sided with Wickstead. The convictions would stand. 3 years later, in 1980, there was yet another new development, and this one is pretty amazing. Tony Wilde, the inmate who dropped all of those juicy details about Reginald Dudley's alleged confession and the unbelievable story about the severed head, was released from prison. He then admitted to making up some of the testimony that had gotten Dudley and Maynard convicted, and he said so in an interview with a London magazine. but attempts to reopen the case were once again inexplicably rejected. Fast forward 15 years to 1995. Tony Wilde has found Jesus and is a born-again Christian. Now he really wants to set things right. He tells The Guardian that he told a bag of lies to get a reduced sentence, and it worked. He served only 4 years for a series of armed robberies, while his co-defendants got 20 years. Tony Wilde's dirty little secret was now fully out in the open. Everything he had said was pure fiction, but he refused to be interviewed by police for fear of being locked up again for perjury. Chris Smith, a member of Parliament representing Islington South, called for a review of the Dudley and Maynard convictions. Again, crickets. Nothing. In 1997, Reginald Dudley was released from prison, not because the Home Office had finally decided to do the right thing, but because he was granted parole. Maynard, however, was still locked up. Even after regaining his freedom, Dudley vowed to clear his name and also get his friend Robert Maynard out of jail. Let's not forget, Wickstead's case was based on two things and little else: lies told under oath by Tony Wilde and confessions that the police claim Dudley and Maynard had made. They had no actual proof of anything. They had no proof that the Legal and Standard gang knew anything about Moseley's death before the river belched up those body parts. They had no forensic evidence or murder weapons. All they had was the word of two criminals, one of which they completely ignored in declaring Ronald Fright not guilty, which is a bit odd, and then the head that Dudley and Maynard had supposedly removed from Billy Moseley's body mysteriously surfaces while the alleged killers are behind bars. And here's a bit of icing for this cake. There was no gang called Legal and General. Drinking buddies once nicknamed Dudley and Maynard Legal and General after the two had walked into a pub looking like characters from a Legal and General insurance commercial, and the nickname stuck. It wasn't until 2002 that London's Home Office would finally review the case and overturn all of the convictions. Reginald Dudley and his daughter Kathleen both had their convictions wiped from their records. Charlie Clark had died after serving his 4 years in prison, and so he was cleared posthumously. And Robert Maynard was finally freed. In 2002, Dudley was 77 and Maynard was 63. It's unclear whether either is still alive. Wickstead died in 2001 at the age of 77. Kathleen Dudley once said that she believes she knows who killed Moseley. She has met him. But considering what had been done to Billy Moseley and Mickey Cornwall, it seems very understandable that she would prefer to stay quiet. The murders remain unsolved. Not many true crime stories have happy endings, so I'm really glad that Dudley and Maynard were finally exonerated. Shame on Wickstead and the entire 1970s UK justice system for what they did to those two men. It's appalling, but I understand that it's better now, so I guess that's good. Please be sure to share your thoughts in the comments, and also please consider liking and subscribing. Thank you for watching.